I'm looking at trying to make somewhat of a difference while I can. I'm running out of time. I'm going to be 66. Things are breaking down. Knee gives out every now and then. Fucking shoulder gives out every now and then. Shit like that's flying apart on me. I've only got a certain amount of time to get this message across, and now I almost feel like I'm morally obligated too. I do not want to die on this planet having left it worse than when I got here. I don't want to be a parasite. And I made a lot of money when I was exporting, 3 times the money I'm making now. And had 3 houses, nice cars, everything. And but I was miserable. And you're on a pile of rocks, and all you do is get screwed by 1 or 2 guys, and suddenly I lost 180 grand here, and I lost 50 grand there, and my pile of rocks is coming apart. And so it's too stressful. But I like what I'm doing, and I think what I'm doing is sustainable, and I'm onto something here, and I need to share it. These trees mean something. They have a place in our environment, and they have a place in our lives, whether we choose to believe it or not. They have a story to tell. The older hardwood's been around a long time, and it does not lend itself to mass production like alder wood or fir does or something like that. It gets very large. It can get some defects. It can get some holes. It can have some hollow spots. And people tend to analyze it at what's missing instead of looking at it as what's still left. What is still salvageable that is the very best parts of this log that tell the story of what this tree has gone through. And the beautiful figures and colors, and all that's lost if you don't do something to preserve it. All that's lost. There's enough hybrid, monochrome, orchard-raised, plantation-raised wood that's identical to each piece is identical to the other. And I understand that works well in mass production. But mass production isn't always where you attain your best quality. Your quality sometimes comes from individual pieces, with individual craftsmen applying their talent to that piece. My background was art, and I was drawn into that because this, in particular, this is nature's art. There's beautiful pictures and beautiful patterns and beautiful colors, and I get to feel like I'm part of the process, even though I don't really do that much. The tree already knows what it wants to be. The tree's already decided. Basically, you just have to listen. When you look at the tree with its weird shapes and its holes, and you look at all the little pieces that are left, and you analyze it. You break it down into the best pieces you can get out of it. That's already predetermined by the tree. You just have to pay attention to what it's telling you. I think all of the hardwood in the Pacific Northwest, and a great deal of it throughout the world, has the same issues. When they get truly mature, they become difficult to mass produce. They have unusual shapes, unusual sizes. They don't make consistent material that's exactly the same as the last piece. They tend to be too individualistic, so they are cast aside. Some of the best wood in the world is cast aside. I would say the lowest 90% hardwood goes to the pulp yard, but so does the top 10%. The stuff that's oversized, it doesn't fit in a standard milling operation. I like to look at the stories that they tell me. I like to make contact with a log. I like to go and see where it came from. I like to know that I prefer to buy the dead or dying logs and let the young ones grow and try and promote people letting them grow and give them reasons to be there. There's a million reasons why we should have a diversified forest, and really not that many credible reasons as to why we shouldn't, except for short-term gain. That's the only thing. The long-term gain, I think, can be proven, if it's done right, to be more environmentally friendly and more economically feasible than the short-term gain. But you have to be willing to think generationally. You have to be willing to think about what's going to happen in the next couple generations. The forest did not lend itself to our lifespan, and we tend to think that we need to mold things, we need to manage things. And yes, there is some management needed, but not to the extent that we're doing it. We're playing Jenga with a giant puzzle, and we're pulling out pieces that have been there for thousands of years because we don't understand what to do with them or how to work them. But they were there for a reason, and that's going to bite us in the ass. It's going to prove to be our downfall in virtually everything that we do if we don't stop and think about nature has a plan, and we have to, instead of have a symbiotic relationship with the earth instead of a parasitic one. And so we have to comply a little bit. We have to work along with it. We can adapt. We can do things, I think, that make the forest sustainable. But the mega mills are not. And that whole concept is not sustainable. You wipe out everything within 50-mile radius, and everything's clear-cut, and pretty soon they're trucking it further and further away, and you're in a big hurry to mass produce very low-grade material as quickly as you can at a limited profit. And the effect on the forest is astronomical. The effect on the environment is astronomical. And if we don't see it happen directly in front of our eyes within a matter of moments, we tend not to recognize it. And the effect is decades long, centuries long. And so I think now is the time to try and do something. I'm trying to put some of my resources into changing things as much as I can. There's a few people like me where we spend a lot of time in the woods. We spend a lot of time around our mills, and we love wood. I don't want to see all the wood cut on the planet, and I don't really think loggers are the bad guys here either. If they had a reason to keep the hardwood, and it made sense to them, then they wouldn't be cutting it. And loggers are generational, like farmers are. They have their kids and grandkids and nieces and nephews, and everybody tends to, they tend to work in family groups like that. And they don't want, I've never heard a logger actually want to just cut all the wood off the planet and leave it barren with nothing. They tend to love the woods. They like being in the woods. They like seeing the trees. Nobody really likes seeing it clear cut. Sometimes that is what they have to do for a particular parcel because it was been clear cut and raised as a crop, and clear cut and raised as a crop. Sending it back into a natural forest is a little tough to do. But it can be done. It's necessary. We saw with the fires recently, there's another reason for having the hardwood. The hardwood line is a natural fire line. And as fir exists mainly at 1,100 feet and above, fir is king. It does really well there. If you have hardwood around the base of the hill where there's more water, there's creeks, there's streams, and that's essentially where it needs to be. There's other reasons to have it there besides the fire, but just getting back to the fire, it has a higher ignition point and a broader canopy. It is a natural place to put up a fire line. If you don't have it there, the fire just goes up, and soon you've got, instead of having 100-acre burn, you've got thousands of acres burn. I was up at Scott's Mills. The only fir I saw left standing had hardwood around the base of it. And the fire just went around it. And basically, all the hybrid fir that's being produced now, it grows fast. It grows with a looser grain, a lower ignition point, and they're basically sparklers. They're close together, and they have a shorter lifespan. They grow quicker. It makes a lower quality lumber, but it makes it faster. And so we've had some issues there, getting rid of the hardwood. Also, the maple, it is a nitrogen fixer and a pH balancer. And as it breaks down into the ground, lichens, mycelium, ferns, everything grows. The creeks do better. The streams do better. It helps break down some of the acidity in the soil. And it winds up being just a complement to what's going on. It's an essential part of the Pacific Coast rainforest. It really is. Alder and maple are both nitrogen fixers. They're needed around streams. When we get rid of them, what we do is we set ourselves open for the green brush dying, the lichens dying, the ferns dying, the streams, suddenly they're not producing. The fish have issues. You're going to have all kinds of problems as a part of that. And it becomes, not just to mention that, a few years ago, EcoTrust came out with a report that showed that a mixed forest eats 80% more carbon out of the air. Now, that's pretty significant. If they would have said a hybrid fir forest eats 80% more carbon out of the air, I think they'd be waving banners. But that information was pretty much just ignored. And part of the problem is yes, most of the hardwood we have out there isn't particularly good. And we spent tons of time cloning and processing and making hybrid firs to grow faster and quicker and closer together in a shorter term. And we spent an equal amount of time poisoning the hardwood and finding ways of eradicating it, having it classed as a competitive grass so we can spray it. And then the hardwood that does come up is incidental hardwood. The fir's on a 40-year cycle. The ground was sprayed when the fir was put down. No maple would sprout up for 5 years. The oldest maple you're going to have there is 35 years, and the first 10 years of its life, it was sucking poison through its roots. So it's probably not going to get very big, it's not going to be very healthy, and it's going to die, and it's going to look like a weed. And so we have to go back to the same thing we did with fir to some extent. We have to find genetics. There are superior grade maples. I've seen single maples single stems 59 inches at 29 feet. Small canopies, 3,500 board feet in one stem. That's more than a log truckload of fir in one stem. And it took up the same amount of space as it would for 3 or 4 firs. 2 generations, say 6 firs, was worth much more than 6 firs. Much more. So economically, it's viable, but only with the right kinds of woods. Ash, now we've got the emerald ash borer. Most of the big ash has been eliminated. The stumps have been poisoned. We've got incidental hardwood that's weak. The borer is going to go right through it. Disease and parasites are going to eat right through this stuff. We need to clone some of the biggest, healthiest ones we have left on the planet of all of our hardwood. And cedars, our Port Orford cedar, our western red cedar. Everything that we should have in the forest that used to be there, we need to find a way to put it back. And the way to make it work is to make it economically viable as well as environmentally viable. And that's where cloning comes in, and that's where some resources come in, trying to create an environment where we can go out and find the very best oaks, the very best madronas, the very best myrtle woods, the very best yew woods, and clone them. So when we put the forest back, we actually have something that makes sense to let it grow. It's still a marketable product in the end, and then grow another one, let it grow some more. And basically all you have to do to propagate maple is stop poisoning it. So we have erosion issues, we have toxins issues, we have creek issues, we have air quality issues, and those are all really, really good reasons, but nobody who owns 1,000 acres of ground really wants to put maple on it. But if you gave them a good reason to, if you gave them good stock and said, look, in 100 years, you're going to have 100 trees that are going to produce, 1,500, 2,000 board feet apiece. And there's going to be perfectly clear grain, beautiful, quarter-sawn clear. You've got something that is worth so much more than the fir would be. it doesn't make any sense not to. But until that step is made and you can show that, yes, it's worth the investment, you're going to get somebody who looks at maple is like just costing them money, or any hardwood is costing them money, because that's where fir could grow. If we could just get rid of that, we could just poison it, we could just burn it. Much of the big hardwood is pushed up in piles and poured up with diesel and burned. Just burned. The biggest, oldest 200-300-year-old, 400-year-old hardwood trees, they're pushed up in piles and burned. The smaller stuff, that some of that makes it to pulp yards. It's expensive to go after these big logs. The loggers don't want to do it unless they have a home for it. They'll just push it over with a cat and punch it up in a pile. It's expensive to haul. Everything about handling them, it's labor intensive. It doesn't lend itself to automation. So it is very time consuming that way. Each piece is a snowflake. And what you've got there is pieces that, when you make something out of them, it's unique. It's not something punched out of carpet, crap board or something you'd buy at IKEA or Walmart or something. It's not going to wind up in somebody's landfill or garage sale. The stuff generally gets handed down for generations. When you make a decent piece of furniture, it actually saves you money. Spend money to begin with, and you won't buy 6 or 7 tables. Your grandchildren will sit at that damn table. And it'll be just as nice, if not, more valuable when they're sitting at it. It doesn't make any sense to know what we know now about the situation we're in and go about it any other way. We can't keep wasting resources. We can't keep buying disposable products. We don't want to make the entire planet just a refuse for our disposables. We need to kind of enlighten ourselves as to what we're doing. And I think that balancing the forest out is a good way to start. It's a small piece of the equation, but it's an integral piece, and we have to do something. I made my living off of the wood, and I don't want to go to my grave knowing that the planet is worse off because I lived here. I don't want to be a parasite. So for me, it's not about the money anymore. I mean, I'd like to make a good living, everybody does, but I would not be happy knowing that I could have made a positive change and didn't. And I just sat back and collected my check and kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to stir up any feathers, and went about my business and watched the apple rot, because another worm is eating on the apple. And so, again, it comes back to being in a symbiotic relationship with Earth instead of a parasitic relationship. But I think the forest, from what I see, it's changed a lot. I'm scared that if we don't do something, ash is going to be like the chestnut, and then the maple, the big maples, they're going to go. And the white oak, the madrone, and I know there's still a lot of this material left, but it's not the best stuff. And we need to focus on balancing it out. I'm not anti-fir. We need fir because it's a good building material, and there's a lot of jobs based on it, and there's a lot of wood out there, and there's a lot of people who have raised crops for generations, and that's what it is. It's a crop. It's not a forest. It's a crop. If you walk into a stand of fir and it's all 30 years old and it's all 15 feet apart, that's somebody's crop. That's not a forest. When you go into a forest, you've got ferns that are 6 feet tall. You've got devil's club in there. You've got a variety of trees. It's not easy ground to mitigate. It's not easy to get through. It's not easy to walk around. But it is definitely worth it. It's just, you see animals you don't often see in fir forests. You'll see plants and flowers and moss a foot thick hanging off the side of a tree. And it's just beautiful, and the air smells better. I think that I have a chance to try and do something, so I'm kind of obligated to do it. I'm a little bit surprised there's not a lot of big companies out there supporting the cloning of the hardwoods, but maybe they're just really busy or not paying attention, or maybe they just haven't educated themselves and they don't know. But it's a chance to make a difference. It's a chance to make a huge difference and create more jobs. If we had a hardwood industry here like they do on the East Coast, the furniture makers, the craftsmen, we have some of the most skilled craftsmen in the world that live in Oregon, Washington, and California. They're some of the most skilled in the world, often in remote locations, and sometimes the best people at building stuff are the worst people at promoting themselves. And but I've met several of them myself, and I think that if they had access to the superior quality material in the future, the big oaks that you could quarter saw and get 16-inch wide boards out of, and same thing with the maple and the myrtle wood, just beautiful quarter sawn clear material out of genetically superior hardwood, that industry would thrive because we have better hardwood than anywhere else on the planet. We have huge trees here when let to grow into, when they're let to go to maturity. But you cannot make wine out of a grape that is not ripe and blame the grape if the wine doesn't come out. You cannot harvest maple at 25 years old and say, oh, look, this is shitty. This isn't nearly as good as East Coast maple. Because it's not going to be. Because you're picking on immature fibers, the part of the log that usually we don't saw. We turn that into bunks or give it away as free firewood. The part that you want is the part that takes the longest part to grow. And that takes a little bit of patience, but we've got to get that, or we're not going to survive as a planet just in every aspect of our lives. It just seems like when people came here from, Europe or wherever they migrated from, they planted orchards they would never live to see the fruit from. They did it for future generations. They put roads in they knew they weren't going to use. Their lives were toward the end. They dug wells for water that they wouldn't drink. And they didn't even know who was going to be drinking it, but it was a well. Somebody was going to get it. And so you have to be willing to do things for people that you're never going to meet and you're never going to see.